The last newsletter from the fellowship reminded us that it's just 50 years since we got involved with George Eliot. Kathleen, because she saw a version of Silas Marner on television, and I, because I was getting interested in local history and knew that George Eliot had lived in Coventry for a while. So between the two of us, we developed an interest. And we discovered that there was a George Eliot Fellowship in Nuneaton, and that there was going to be an annual general meeting before very long. So we said we would go over and see what went on. But Kathleen couldn't go on that particular evening. So I said, well, I'll go and sit at the back and listen. So I went across to Nuneaton Library to find 5 people in the corner of the library. This was all the fellowship was. So of course they wanted to know where I'd come from and who I was. And Coventry, they said. To cut a very long story short, I was on the committee before I came home. And that was 1965. So I became the treasurer, I think, first of all. And then the next year, secretary. But I'm not particularly good at secretarial duties. And Kath said, well, I'd like to be the secretary. So we put her name forward in 68, and she became the secretary then. The old chairman, it was a funny old thing, died in about 1970. So I then took over the chairmanship so that we were a partnership after that. But it was very, very small until 1969, which was the 150th anniversary of her birth. And we thought we ought to do something for that particular year. So we got a number of activities sorted out, including a film show made by the local CD club. And that was a great success, and lots of people interested in that kind of activity came to a meeting to see this film, and it generated a lot of interest. And it really began to take off from there. One of the things we did was to have a display in the local museum, and we wanted somebody to open the display, and we couldn't think of anybody appropriate. We thought of television personalities, that sort of thing, but it really wasn't great. Then Kath was listening to the radio one night and heard Gabriel Woolf, the actor, reading Middlemarch on Book at Bedtime, I think it was. And she thought, well, he must know something about George Eliot since he's reading one of her books. So she got in touch with him to find happily that he's a real George Eliot devotee. He really thinks she's wonderful. So he readily agreed to come and open the museum. And he also did a reading for the Belgrade Theatre Club down in central Coventry, which we attended. And from that we got the idea that he might like to do readings from George Eliot's books. And he agreed to do that, and that developed into an annual programme, which is still going on now, many, many years later. So those are the things which have helped us to develop. And I say 1969 really was the take-off point. Something else we were interested in was the music of Elgar, the British composer, and we joined the society that supports him. And they were just about to put a memorial to him in Westminster Abbey. So we actually attended this memorial service. And coming away from the service, we thought, we ought to be able to do this for George Eliot, because she was debarred from any memorial in the Abbey because of her lifestyle. So it was never done. So we began to make representations to the Abbey, and Dean Carpenter, who was in charge in those days, was a lovely chap and very interested in literature, and very willing indeed to accept a memorial. So that was one idea that we'd had, but no idea how to do it, you know. And then I realised that I had a child playmate who had become a sculptor and learned lettering and that sort of thing. So we got in touch with him and asked him if he thought he could do it, and he said he would. And the Abbey didn't know anything about him, but they made enquiries and decided that he was competent enough. So eventually he agreed to do it. Well, we'd asked the Elgar Society how much it had cost them to put their memorial in, and they said £700. So we budgeted for £1,000 and thought that that would be more than enough. But when John Skelton had produced this memorial, we all met at the Abbey for him to show it to us, and he said, well, there it is, you know, and it was agreed to accept it. But it was going to be £2,000. So we staggered out of the Abbey, wondering where we were going to get another £1,000 from. And Kath had been writing a book towards 1980, and she'd been in touch with an agent who was in London. So I said, let's go and have a word with Bertie van Taal and ask his advice and see what can be done. So we went round to his office while we were in London, and he said, of course you can do it. He said, all you need is an appeal letter. I'll put an appeal letter together and get a couple of members of Parliament to put their names on the top. It'll go nicely. So this was done, and this appeal letter was posted eventually. And of course we did all that. And well, the result was we got £4,000 instead of 2,000. So in 1980, when the stone was dedicated, we had 700 people, I think it was, in the Abbey, which was amazing. Amongst those attending was the man who'd written a great biography of George Eliot, which came out at about that time, which was another, you know, good thing for us. Dr. Gordon Haight, and he was our guest of honour at the wreath laying. Gave an address about George Eliot, and then because of the presence of the members of Parliament and the American ambassador was there and various people, we got permission to have a tea over in the House of Commons restaurant. So we went across the road and enjoyed the hospitality of the restaurant. So it was a real red letter day.
It really was. It was splendid.